You might know her as television's most magical genie, but few knew her genie costume was secretly censored. In 1966, NBC banned showing Barbara Eden's belly button in TV. No, she wasn't naked. She wasn't scandalous. So, what made NBC so afraid of showing her midriff? Stick around. The surprising reason is revealed in fact number 15. In this video, I'm revealing 20 similar strange facts about Barbara Eden that even die-hard fans don't know much about. Number 20, the screen test she never knew existed. Barbara Eden signed her first major studio contract with 20th Century Fox in 1956, believing the formal negotiations marked the beginning of her evaluation period. But Fox executives had been evaluating her for months before she ever knew she was being considered. Studio archival notes from 1955 reveal that Fox talent scouts had filmed Eden during what she believed were informal studio visits and casual meetings with executives. She thought she was simply touring the lot and having exploratory conversations. Yet cameramen were positioned in adjacent rooms with two-way mirrors. Recording equipment captured her walking through hallways, sitting in waiting areas, and interacting with studio staff during what she assumed were off-camera moments. Fox executives wanted to observe her natural presence versus her performed presence during formal auditions. The studio system had developed sophisticated techniques for evaluating contract player potential beyond traditional screen tests. Executives believed performers could mask their authentic personalities during formal auditions. But candid footage revealed how performers carried themselves when they thought no one important was watching. The footage captured Eden's interactions with secretaries, janitors, and low-level studio employees, people she had no professional reason to impress. Executives watched how she responded to being kept waiting, how she handled small frustrations, whether she maintained composure and courtesy when she thought no executives were present. The evaluation philosophy reflected the studio system's total control mindset. They weren't just hiring performers for specific roles, they were investing in contract players who would represent the studio brand across multiple projects for years. A performer's off-camera behavior mattered as much as on-camera talent because studios needed to ensure their investments wouldn't create public relations problems. Fox executives reviewed hours of this candid footage before ever offering Eden a formal screen test. The footage convinced them she possessed the professional temperament they required. But here's what made this particularly invasive. Eden only discovered this practice years later in the early 1960s when a studio executive mentioned it casually during contract renewal discussions. She learned that her earliest interactions with Fox, moments she remembered as informal, low-pressure visits, had been carefully staged evaluation scenarios. The studio lot tour that felt casual was actually a structured test with hidden cameras and predetermined observation points. The accidental meetings with executives in hallways were scheduled events designed to observe her spontaneous reactions. Eden had been performing for Fox evaluation from her first moment on the lot, but performing without a script, without direction, and without knowing she was being watched and judged. The studio had turned her into an unwitting subject in their talent assessment process. Contract players weren't just hired, they were surveilled, analyzed, and evaluated through methods they never consented to or even knew existed. When Eden signed her contract, she believed she was agreeing to provide acting services in exchange for salary and professional opportunities. But she'd actually been under studio evaluation for months, with footage of her private moments stored in studio archives and reviewed by executives making decisions about her professional future. The practice wasn't unique to Fox or to Eden. Multiple studios employed similar techniques throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. But the practice remained largely unknown to performers until much later, when some studio executives began discussing these methods in industry publications. By then, the studio system had collapsed and the practice had been abandoned. Number 19. The insurance policy written on her face. When Barbara Eden signed her contract with Screen Gems for I Dream of Jeannie in 1965, buried in the contract attachments was documentation for an insurance policy the studio had taken out on Eden's physical appearance, specifically her face and smile. The policy, underwritten by Lloyd's of London and valued at several $100,000, wasn't unusual in principle. Studios routinely insured valuable physical assets of their stars. Betty Grable's legs were famously insured for $1 million. Yet here's what made Eden's policy particularly restrictive. The insurance terms included an extensive list of prohibited activities she was contractually obligated to avoid. The policy documentation specified that any facial injury resulting from Eden engaging in listed prohibited activities would void the insurance coverage. More significantly, the studio contract made clear that if Eden's prohibited activity caused facial injury requiring production delays or recasting, she would be personally liable for breach of contract and financial damages. The prohibited activities list was extensive. Eden couldn't ski, ride motorcycles, go horseback riding, play tennis, swim in ocean surf, or engage in any contact sports or recreational activities with meaningful injury risk. She couldn't travel to certain beach locations known for strong currents or rocky shores. The dietary restrictions were equally specific. She couldn't eat shellfish due to allergy risk that could cause facial swelling. Certain foods that might cause skin reactions or temporary facial blemishes were listed as strongly discouraged. But the restrictions extended beyond injury prevention into appearance maintenance requirements. Eden was required to maintain her weight within a 5-pound range specified in the contract. She was required to avoid excessive sun exposure that might cause premature aging, freckling, or skin damage. She was required to use studio-approved skincare products and avoid any cosmetic procedures or treatments without advance written studio approval. The contract specified that Screen Gems maintained approval authority over any cosmetic or medical procedures that might affect her facial appearance, even temporarily. If Eden wanted to get a different haircut, change her hair color, or make any significant appearance modifications, she needed written studio permission in advance. Eden carried documentation, essentially a card listing prohibited activities, that she was required to reference when making personal recreational decisions. If friends invited her skiing or to play beach volleyball, she had to decline based on contract restrictions. If she wanted to try a new restaurant serving exotic cuisine, she had to consider whether any menu items might trigger the dietary restriction clauses. The insurance policy and accompanying contract provisions effectively gave the studio veto power over significant aspects of her personal life and recreational activities. The studio's reasoning was purely economic. I Dream of Jeannie was built around Eden's specific appearance and persona. Her character's visual presentation, particularly her face and smile, were central to the show's marketing and audience appeal. Replacing her would be prohibitively expensive and potentially impossible without destroying the show's commercial viability. The insurance policy protected the studio's financial investment, but the contract provisions shifted responsibility for that protection entirely onto Eden herself. She bore the burden of constant vigilance about her own physical safety and appearance maintenance. Yet Eden had limited negotiating power over these terms. The insurance policy and activity restrictions were presented as non-negotiable standard provisions for lead actresses in television series. Her options were to accept the terms or decline the role entirely. For a performer who had worked for years to reach lead status in a network television series, declining wasn't realistic. She signed the contract, accepted the restrictions, and adjusted her personal life accordingly. The insurance policy remained in effect throughout the show's 5-season run. Only after the series ended were the restrictions lifted. By then, Eden had spent 5 years living under constraints that treated her face as studio property, requiring constant protection and maintenance. Number 18. First, her role was cut without warning. Barbara Eden attended the August 1956 premiere of Back from Eternity, expecting to see her film debut. But publicity materials listed her in the credits. The lights dimmed. Eden watched, waiting for her scenes. Yet, as the aircraft sequences unfolded, her character never appeared. She sat through the entire film, realizing the truth. Her performance had been removed completely. But the printed program still listed Barbara Eden among the cast. Production logs revealed what happened. RKO had assembled a rough cut running 20 minutes too long. Preview screenings indicated pacing problems. Eden's character provided atmosphere but didn't advance the story. Her scenes became expendable. The editors made their cuts, the studio approved, and the film moved into distribution. Yet nobody notified Eden. According to Photoplay magazine, she learned about the cut only at the premiere itself. Her contract and compensation weren't affected. She had fulfilled her obligation. But whether those scenes appeared was irrelevant to her employment status. The studio paid for her time, captured her performance, then exercised their prerogative to discard it. Eden absorbed the lesson quietly. There's no record of complaints. Number 17, The Elvis Connection. Flaming Star entered production in 1960 with Barbara Eden cast through an unusual route. Elvis Presley specifically requested her. But this wasn't standard casting procedure. Presley's direct advocacy represented significant star power. His films generated substantial revenue for Fox. Eden got the role. Yet complications emerged. The Motion Picture Production Code still governed moral content rigorously. Code administrators reviewed the screenplay and flagged problems. Production code files show objections about romantic intensity between Eden and Presley. The original screenplay positioned them as romantic interests. Yet code reviewers determined this problematic given Presley's controversial image. Studio executives received instructions to revise the romantic elements, rewriting them to appear fraternal. This wasn't minor adjustment. MGM notes confirm entire sequences required complete reshooting. But the film was already in production. Scenes had been staged, lit, and filmed with romantic chemistry. Those completed scenes became unusable. Everything needed reblocking and relighting. Eden found herself cast specifically by the film's star for a romantic role, only to have that role fundamentally transformed mid-production. She had developed a performance based on romantic interpretation. But now, she had to abandon that entirely. She essentially started over while maintaining the same shooting schedule. The explanation: code administrators were especially vigilant about Presley Productions, examining them for any content amplifying his controversial image. When code administrators demanded changes, compliance wasn't optional. None of this appeared in promotional materials. Audiences saw only the code-approved final cut. The originally filmed romantic scenes disappeared into studio vaults, eventually lost. Number 16. Television's first Genie bottle was a whiskey decanter. When I Dream of Jeannie pilot production began in 1965, the script called for a distinctive bottle. But NBC and Screen Gems faced standard television budget pressures. Commissioning a custom-designed bottle would cost thousands and require weeks, impractical for a pilot that might never be ordered to series. The art department scoured available sources. NBC archives reveal they found a 1964 Jim Beam whiskey decanter at a local liquor store. The bottle's curve suggested Middle Eastern aesthetics. It was immediately available and cost almost nothing. The art department bought it, cleaned it, and applied paint in pink and gold tones. Small decorative elements were glued to the surface. The entire transformation took less than a day. The total cost was under $50. This improvisation solved the budget problem. The modified decanter appeared in the pilot and tested well. NBC ordered the series, but nobody reconsidered the prop choice. What began as a cost-saving shortcut became permanent. The bottle appeared in every episode across 5 seasons and 139 installments. A whiskey decanter that cost under $50 became one of television's most recognizable objects, generating millions in merchandising value. Number 15, the network banned Her Navel. During I Dream of Jeannie's second season, NBC network censors declared Barbara Eden's exposed midriff indecent. But this wasn't a minor concern. It was a formal policy directive requiring immediate compliance, specifically targeting Eden's navel. Standards officials determined that showing a woman's navel violated acceptable taste boundaries. The reasoning reflected television's peculiar moral framework. Networks operated under constant pressure from advertisers and advocacy groups. Standards departments wielded substantial power, with authority to demand costume modifications or reject episodes entirely. But here's what made the ruling strange: audiences regularly saw more revealing costumes in films, beach scenes in dramas, and swimsuit presentations in variety programs. Yet I Dream of Jeannie triggered specific concern because Eden's costume appeared in every episode as the show's signature element. The directive created immediate logistical problems. Eden's costume had been designed to evoke Jeannie aesthetics with exposed midriff. But promotional materials had already been distributed. Multiple episodes had been completed showing Eden's navel. Costume designer Gwen Wakeling's solution involved adding high-waisted veil panels that draped from the belt, creating strategic coverage. The modifications were subtle, yet they were absolutely effective at concealing Eden's navel. But Wakeling's design adjustments required creating multiple modified costumes, adding substantial budget costs. The costume changes solved only part of the problem. Directors and cinematographers received specific instructions about camera angles. Even with the modified costume, certain angles might reveal the prohibited navel. Camera operators needed constant awareness of Eden's position. Eden was required to wear a costume designed to be revealing, yet that costume had to be carefully monitored to prevent revealing too much. She had to move and perform while remaining aware that certain gestures might create standards problems. The press treated the issue as a moral debate. Some coverage mocked the policy as absurd. Other commentary praised NBC for maintaining decency standards. But this wasn't about Eden's choices. Network standards departments operated with authority that superseded creative judgment. Once they issued a directive, compliance was mandatory. Number 14, a pregnancy hidden by camera tricks. During I Dream of Jeannie's second production season, Barbara Eden discovered she was pregnant. But Eden's character appeared in elaborate costumes, performed physical comedy involving falls, and worked within a fantasy premise requiring body continuity. A visibly pregnant Jeannie would create narrative problems, and 1960s television avoided acknowledging pregnancy outside specific dramatic contexts. Production teams faced a choice: halt filming for months, disrupting network scheduling, or continue shooting while concealing her condition. Economic realities made the second option the only viable choice. Directors modified shot composition extensively, framing Eden from the waist up whenever possible. Scenes originally requiring full body shots were reblocked to justify tighter framing. Camera angles changed to shoot from slightly above. Lighting was adjusted to minimize revealing shadows. But for wide shots requiring full body visibility, the production employed stand-ins and doubles matched to Eden in heightened coloring. Production stills confirm extensive use of doubles, far more than typical productions. Yet the show's format aided this deception. Many scenes involved magical transformations where Jeannie appeared or disappeared. But here's what separated this from typical problem solving: the production maintained absolute secrecy. Network publicity made no announcements. Entertainment press received no hints. The show continued airing with no public acknowledgement that anything had changed. But this secrecy wasn't about shame. It was about maintaining the fantasy framework. Acknowledging that the actress playing an immortal magical being was pregnant would puncture the carefully maintained illusion. Eden's costume required regular alterations as her body changed. Shooting schedules were reorganized to film Eden's scenes during periods when she felt physically capable. Eden continued performing physical comedy while pregnant, wearing elaborate costumes under hot studio lights, memorizing dialogue and hitting marks, all while managing the physical challenges pregnancy creates. The professionalism this required went beyond what contracts technically demanded. Yet television production in the 1960s operated on brutal efficiency standards. Audiences watching these episodes had no idea anything was different. The camera tricks, the doubles, the careful framing, all remained invisible. This represents exactly the kind of seamless deception that television production teams prided themselves on achieving. Number 13, Jeannie was nearly a brunette. The Barbara Eden audiences recognize golden blonde hair wasn't the original creative vision. But network documents reveal that initial casting memos described Jeannie as earth, toned, and mysterious. The first costume tests photographed Eden wearing a brunette wig. Yet this wasn't a casual experiment. It represented the production team's genuine intention. The reasoning reflected conventional wisdom about depicting Middle Eastern fantasy characters. Dark hair signaled foreign and mysterious in 1960s visual language. The assumption that audiences expected this aesthetic was so embedded that the creative team didn't question it. But pilot testing changed everything. NBC screened the pilot before test audiences and gathered detailed feedback. The pilot featuring brunette wigged Eden went through this process. The results surprised executives. Test audience responses specifically mentioned lack of appeal in the lead character's appearance. Feedback included comments about the character appearing too dark and less friendly than expected for comedy. Focus groups revealed audience preferences for lighter, brighter visual presentations in comedy programming. But here's what makes this significant. This wasn't about Eden's talent. Test audiences responded positively to her comedic timing. The concern centered entirely on visual presentation. NBC's research indicated that blonde performers tested better for comedy roles, generating responses like approachable and fun. Brunette performers received descriptions like serious and dramatic. Qualities valuable for drama, but problematic for light comedy. Network executives examined the test data and made their determination: Jeannie needed to be blonde. The decision came not from creative vision, but from quantitative analysis of audience responses. Yet the change required more than removing Eden's brunette wig. The entire color palette needed recalibration. Costume designer Wakeling had created Jeannie's outfit to complement darker hair tones. When Eden became blonde, the costume colors required adjustment. The bottle prop needed slight modifications. Even the living room set received tweaks. A single test audience response fundamentally altered one of television's most enduring images. The golden blonde Jeannie became so iconic it's now difficult to imagine the character any other way. Yet that version existed only because statistical analysis overruled the creative team's initial vision. Number 12, filming during a real rocket launch. The opening montage of I Dream of Jeannie's first season included NASA rocket launch footage, but securing this footage involved navigating complex bureaucratic processes and actual national security restrictions. NBC production notes from 1965 reveal that obtaining permission to film at Cape Kennedy required multiple government approvals and security clearances. NASA in 1965 occupied a unique position. The agency managed cutting-edge technology with military implications while serving as a public relations showcase. The space program needed positive media coverage, yet it faced genuine security concerns about protecting proprietary technology. NASA maintained careful control over media access. The I Dream of Jeannie crew submitted formal requests months before planned filming, providing detailed descriptions. NASA officials reviewed these through multiple departments. The evaluation took weeks. But here's what separated this from typical location shooting. Once permission was granted, the crew discovered that access came with severe limitations. Security protocols forbade close-up photography of launch equipment, control facilities, or personnel. Camera crews were restricted to designated observation areas at substantial distance from actual operations. They couldn't interview NASA personnel, couldn't film inside restricted buildings, and couldn't approach the launch pad. These restrictions were non-negotiable and enforced by military security personnel. The production team arrived during a scheduled test firing, an actual rocket launch. The atmosphere was professional and focused, with hundreds of actual aerospace workers conducting legitimate operations. The I Dream of Jeannie team set up cameras in approved positions and waited. Yet the resulting footage shows exactly what those restrictions created: distant views of launch structures, wide shots of the facility, and the rocket's exhaust trail, all filmed from far enough away that specific technological details remain invisible. NASA security personnel remained present throughout, monitoring camera positions. But the production team faced another problem. Their filming window coincided with actual launch operations. They couldn't control timing or request specific actions. If the test experienced delays, the television crew simply waited, unable to influence military operations. A network production was attempting to capture authentic footage for a fantasy comedy while navigating genuine Cold War security restrictions. The crew was there to support a show about a magical genie, yet they were operating in facilities where actual weapons delivery systems were being tested. But here's what matters: the limited footage obtained at Cape Kennedy wasn't sufficient. NBC archives reveal they ultimately used stock film from NASA's public archive to supplement what they filmed. This composite approach allowed them to create the opening montage without revealing sensitive information. The result looked authentic, yet only a small percentage actually came from on-site filming. Number 11. She sang for the troops during Vietnam. In 1967, at the height of both her television fame and American military involvement in Vietnam, Barbara Eden joined a USO tour led by Bob Hope. But this decision placed her directly in combat zones during one of the most controversial military conflicts in American history. The USO circuit during Vietnam involved genuine physical danger and exposure to combat conditions. Military press records document her performances in Saigon and Da Nang, locations experiencing regular hostile action. The tour logistics involved military transport aircraft, uncertain scheduling dependent on combat operations, and living conditions far removed from Hollywood standards. Performances took place in hastily arranged venues, aircraft hangars, mess halls, outdoor areas. Sound equipment was basic, lighting was improvised, and audiences were combat troops fresh from field operations. But here's what made these performances particularly demanding. The tour continued operating even when security situations deteriorated. Multiple documented instances describe performances continuing during air raid warnings, with shows pausing only when direct attack became imminent. Eden and other performers learned to recognize warning sirens, understand alert levels, and follow military security protocols for rapid evacuation. Yet these weren't theoretical concerns. Combat bases experienced regular rocket and mortar attacks that posed genuine threats to everyone present. The physical environment added its own challenges. Vietnam's climate, extreme heat, high humidity, affected everyone. Eden performed in temperatures regularly exceeding 95 degrees with humidity making breathing difficult. But the most significant aspect was psychological. These performances occurred during intense domestic controversy about American involvement in Vietnam. Protesters regularly demonstrated against the war. Public figures who supported military operations or appeared to through USO participation faced criticism and sometimes career consequences. Eden was aware of this context when she joined the tour. Years later, she described the decision as driven by a sense of duty to troops serving in difficult circumstances, regardless of political debates. Combat troops facing daily violence received a few hours of entertainment representing connection to home and normal life. The psychological value of seeing familiar faces from American television provided benefits that military morale officers recognized as operationally significant. Yet these weren't optional recreational programs. They were considered essential for maintaining troop effectiveness. Here's what separates Eden's participation from simple celebrity appearances. She continued performing even when conditions became dangerous. Multiple accounts describe shows continuing during air raid alerts, with Eden remaining on stage until direct orders came to seek shelter. The commitment to completing performances regardless of circumstance demonstrated professionalism that military personnel recognized. But this wasn't about publicity or career advancement. USO tours generated minimal press coverage and no direct professional benefits. Military press records provide specific dates and locations for Eden's Vietnam appearances. The documentation confirms she performed at forward operating bases near active combat areas, not merely at secure rear facilities. Years later, Eden described the Vietnam USO tour as her proudest professional duty. She spoke about the experience with more emotion and significance than most of her film and television work. The pride stemmed not from artistic achievement, but from service provided during difficult circumstances. Number 10, the unrealized Genie movie. Studio archival records confirm a 1977 plan to produce a theatrical I Dream of Jeannie film, a project that reached advanced development before collapsing over legal disputes. But the concept emerged when television-to-film adaptations were becoming common practice. Successful series that had concluded their runs represented established brands with built-in audience recognition. I Dream of Jeannie, which had ended in 1970 after 5 seasons, fit this profile perfectly. The project began with script development. Writers were hired, treatments were submitted and revised, and a screenplay eventually reached second draft status. Production records show the working title, Jeannie Takes Manhattan. The plot involved bringing the series' central characters to contemporary New York. Yet here's where complications began. The rights to I Dream of Jeannie involved multiple parties with overlapping claims. NBC owned broadcast rights. Screen Gems held production company interests. Individual creators had contractual claims regarding derivative works. Various performers, including Eden, had agreements potentially granting them approval authority or financial participation. When the theatrical project moved into serious production consideration, all these parties began asserting their respective claims. The negotiations exposed fundamental incompatibilities in how different entities viewed the property's value. NBC wanted to retain significant creative authority. Screen Gems sought maximum financial return. Individual creators demanded recognition and compensation beyond original series contracts. Eden's representatives negotiated for favorable financial terms and approval rights. Each party's reasonable business interests conflicted with other parties' equally reasonable interests. The legal complexity escalated beyond what anyone anticipated. Entertainment attorneys examined contracts dating back to the series' 1965 pilot development. Yet they discovered that agreements created for television production didn't clearly address theatrical film adaptations. Multiple parties could make legitimate claims that their interest included derivative work authority. Resolving these conflicts would require either unanimous agreement or expensive litigation to force judicial resolution. Producing a theatrical film required substantial capital investment, multiple millions even for modestly budgeted comedy. Investors wanted clear assurance that the production company held proper rights and wouldn't face legal challenges after completion. Yet the rights situation remained legally ambiguous. Securing production financing became impossible until legal disputes were resolved. But resolving the disputes would require expensive litigation with uncertain outcomes and years of delay. The project stalled and eventually collapsed. Nobody filed formal lawsuits. No court resolved the underlying rights questions. Instead, all parties eventually walked away. The partially completed screenplay was filed away. The project was abandoned. But here's what matters: this wasn't creative failure. The concept was sound, the script showed promise, and talent was available. The collapse happened entirely because of rights disputes and business conflicts having nothing to do with artistic considerations. Only the working title survives in studio archives: Jeannie Takes Manhattan. Number 9, the role she prepared for 3 weeks then lost to a non-actress. In early 1964, Before I Dream of Jeannie began production, Barbara Eden was cast in a significant supporting role in a major studio film production. The casting was confirmed through standard studio channels. Eden received the script, attended initial production meetings, and began preparing for the role. The film was a mid-budget studio production with theatrical distribution scheduled. Not a minor project, but a legitimate career opportunity. Eden took the role seriously. She attended multiple script readings with the director and other cast members. She completed costume fittings with the wardrobe department, with multiple outfits tailored specifically to her measurements. The production shot promotional photographs featuring Eden in costume with other cast members for eventual marketing materials. She worked with the director on character development and scene blocking for her key sequences. The production timeline indicated filming would begin in 3 weeks. Eden adjusted her schedule to accommodate the shooting dates, declining other potential work to maintain availability. But 10 days before filming was scheduled to begin, Eden's agent received a call from the studio. Eden was being replaced. The official explanation was vague. Creative differences and casting adjustments were mentioned without specifics. But the actual reason became clear within days through industry channels. Eden was being replaced by a model who had no professional acting experience. The replacement had no film or television credits. She had never attended acting classes or worked in theatrical productions. Her qualification for the role was singular: she was romantically involved with the film's director. Studio memos preserved in production files confirm that the director had specifically requested the casting change, arguing that the model's natural presence would be more authentic than Eden's trained performance. The studio approved the director's request. Eden was out, the model was in. But here's what made this particularly humiliating: Eden had already completed substantial work on the project. The costume fittings had produced multiple tailored outfits specifically for her. The promotional photographs featured her in character alongside other cast members. Script readings had been conducted with Eden performing opposite the lead actors. All of that work was simply discarded. The costumes were altered or replaced. The promotional photographs were destroyed. New costume fittings and promotional shoots were conducted with the replacement. Eden's contract entitled her to payment for the work she'd completed. The fittings, the readings, the promotional photography. She received compensation for that labor, but she received no credit on the film, no acknowledgement of her involvement, and no ability to include the role on her professional resume. The role she prepared for simply vanished from her career as if it had never existed. Yet consider Eden's position. She couldn't publicly complain about the replacement without risking her reputation in the industry. Performers who spoke negatively about directors or challenged casting decisions were labeled difficult and found future work opportunities drying up. The industry operated on an understanding that performers accepted these situations quietly and moved on. Eden had no recourse beyond accepting her payment and finding new work. She couldn't challenge the director's decision or the studio's approval of it. The power dynamics were entirely one-sided. Directors had authority to request casting changes for virtually any reason, including personal favoritism. Studios deferred to directors' creative judgments, especially on projects where the director had negotiating leverage or previous commercial successes. Contract players like Eden had no corresponding power. They could be hired, prepared, and then replaced without meaningful explanation or professional remedy beyond contractual payment. But the situation revealed Hollywood's broader patterns of nepotism and favoritism. Romantic relationships between directors and performers regularly influenced casting decisions. Directors used their authority to cast romantic partners, family members, or personal friends in roles, often replacing performers who had been initially hired through standard professional channels. Studios rarely intervened unless they threatened the project's commercial viability or production schedule. The practice was so common that industry professionals accepted it as standard operating procedure. The film eventually completed production with the model in Eden's role. It received poor reviews, with critics specifically noting the weak performance from the inexperienced actress in the supporting role Eden had originally been cast for. The model never developed a sustained acting career. The film was a minor commercial disappointment. But none of that vindicated Eden's experience. She had lost a role she'd been hired for and prepared for because a director chose personal favoritism over professional judgment. By the time I Dream of Jeannie made Eden a television star in 1965, the humiliating replacement experience from 1964 had become just another forgotten moment in her pre-stardom career. The role she'd worked on for 3 weeks and then lost to a director's girlfriend was never mentioned in interviews or career retrospectives. It was simply another example of how Hollywood treated working actresses before they achieved enough fame and leverage to protect themselves from arbitrary dismissal and personal favoritism disguised as creative decision-making. Number 8. Her contract forbade public daydreaming. Screen Gems contract clauses governing Barbara Eden during I Dream of Jeannie production included an unusual prohibition. She was forbidden from appearing in rival fantasy programs like Bewitched or any other supernatural comedies. But the restriction extended beyond simple non-compete provisions into what entertainment lawyers described as character monopoly protection. The studio wasn't merely preventing Eden from working for competitors, they were attempting to control which types of roles she could accept anywhere. Screen Gems had invested substantial capital in developing Jeannie as a recognizable character. They argued that Eden's appearance in similar fantasy roles would dilute Jeannie's unique identity and audience perception. Protecting that exclusive identity required restricting Eden's ability to accept roles that might create competitive confusion. Yet here's what made this particularly restrictive. The clause didn't merely prohibit appearing on specific competing shows. It attempted to control an entire category of potential roles across all production companies and networks. Eden couldn't accept guest appearances, supporting roles, or lead roles in any supernatural comedy programming, regardless of production company or network. The restriction theoretically extended even after the series ended. Entertainment attorneys examining the contract noted its unusual breadth. Standard non-compete clauses prevented performers from working for direct competitors during active production. But they didn't attempt to control role selection across the entire industry. This restriction reflected Screen Gems' particular anxiety about television's then new fantasy comedy genre. Bewitched had premiered in 1964 and achieved immediate success. Multiple networks were developing similar concepts. Screen Gems feared losing their competitive advantage if their own star appeared in rival productions. The contract's internal terminology revealed the studio's strategic thinking. The phrase public daydreaming appeared in legal language describing prohibited activities. Screen Gems viewed the genre as aspirational wish fulfillment and wanted to monopolize Eden's association with that psychological territory. Eden's agent needed to review every potential role against the contract restriction to ensure compliance. This added complexity to normal career management, requiring legal evaluation of script offers. The restriction created ongoing compliance burdens and potential liability risks. But here's what matters: this type of restriction became increasingly common in television contracts as intellectual property concerns grew more sophisticated. Studios recognized that characters could become valuable assets independent of specific series. Yet the legal framework for these restrictions remained underdeveloped. Eden never tested the restriction's legal validity through litigation. The restriction illustrates how networks attempted to monopolize not just performer time, but also their mystique in public associations. The studio system that controlled Barbara Eden's name in 1956 had evolved into a more sophisticated system that attempted to control the types of characters she could portray. Number 7, she once played Jeannie's evil twin and got paid twice. The I Dream of Jeannie episode featuring Jeannie's evil twin sister created unusual production and compensation arrangements. But episode payroll sheets reveal Barbara Eden received dual credits and separate appearance fees for portraying both characters. This wasn't merely bookkeeping, it reflected genuine additional work requiring separate compensation under Screen Actors Guild regulations. Filming the episode required extensive technical preparation. The production needed to capture scenes where both characters appeared in frame simultaneously. In 1966, achieving this effect involved careful camera work, precise blocking, and split-screen technique where two separate film performances were optically combined. But here's how filming worked. Eden would perform one character's dialogue while looking at and reacting to a stand-in representing the other character. Camera operators marked exact positions to ensure proper frame alignment. Then the entire scene would be filmed again with Eden playing the opposite role, using the same camera positions but reversing her character. The technical crew marked tape positions on the floor, measured distances precisely, and maintained detailed notes about camera settings. The wardrobe requirements added complexity. Eden needed 2 complete costume sets with distinct color schemes. Each costume change required time. The shooting schedule needed to accommodate substantial delays. Yet the most demanding aspect was performance consistency. Eden needed to maintain precise timing and positioning across takes filmed hours or even days apart. If Good Jeannie reached for an object at a specific moment in one take, Evil Jeannie needed to react to that action at exactly the same moment in a separately filmed take. This required remarkable spatial memory and performance discipline. Screen Actors Guild regulations specified that portraying multiple characters in a single production qualified for additional compensation. Eden's contract entitled her to separate payment for each character. The episode paid Eden twice her normal per episode rate. This created budget complications for a series operating on tight television economics. Yet the creative team determined the twin character story was worth the additional expense. The payroll documentation shows separate line items for Barbara Eden as Jeannie and Barbara Eden as Jeannie II, with identical payment amounts for each credit. But this wasn't a bonus or special consideration. It was standard industry practice properly applied. In 1966, executing split-screen dual-character scenes represented cutting-edge television technical work. The process was expensive, time-consuming, and carried significant risk of visible flaws. Modern digital technology makes such effects routine, yet 1966 production teams were working weeks before chroma key compositing became standard. The episode became a favorite among fans. Yet for Eden, the experience represented an unusual circumstance where union regulations and industry standards properly recognized that certain creative demands warranted proportional compensation. Number 6. A misplaced Emmy nomination. In 1967, NBC submitted Emmy Award nominations for I Dream of Jeannie performers and production staff. but the network's submissions department made a clerical error regarding Barbara Eden's entry. According to Television Academy archives, NBC mistakenly submitted Eden under Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series rather than Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. Yet this wasn't a judgment about Eden's performance, it was simply bureaucratic error. Someone filling out nomination forms checked the wrong category box. The submission went to the Television Academy with incorrect category designation. Academy rules prohibited correcting submission errors after deadline. But here's why the error mattered. Emmy nominations in each category were determined by peer voting within specific Academy branches. Comedy series lead actresses voted on lead actress nominations, while supporting actress voters handled that separate category. Eden's performance was evaluated by the wrong voting group. The two categories used different evaluation criteria. The category confusion also affected competitive context. Had Eden been properly submitted as lead actress, she would have competed against Lucille Ball, Marlo Thomas, and Elizabeth Montgomery. Yet she competed against supporting performers from various shows, a completely different competitive field. No nomination resulted. When the Television Academy announced Emmy nominees, Barbara Eden's name didn't appear in either category. Whether she would have received a nomination with correct category submission remains unknowable. Yet the clerical error guaranteed she had no chance because her performance was evaluated in the wrong competitive context. Emmy submissions involved hundreds of entries across dozens of categories processed by network publicity departments managing multiple series. The system was vulnerable to clerical errors. Performers and production teams invested substantial effort in creating Emmy-worthy work. Yet administrative errors could invalidate all that effort. But here's what matters. Eden never received Emmy recognition for I Dream of Jeannie during the show's entire 5-season run. Whether this was due to performance quality, competitive circumstances, or simply bad luck is impossible to determine. Yet at least 1 year, 1967, is explained by documented clerical error. The Academy archives preserve the mistaken submission paperwork. In 1967, the answer is clear. Administrative error prevented proper evaluation. Number 5, the studio fire that destroyed original footage. On a February morning in 1978, fire broke out at Columbia Studios in Burbank, consuming multiple storage facilities containing archival film and video materials. But the blaze destroyed thousands of film reels and tape masters representing decades of production. Fire department reports documented the scale of loss, entire catalogs of entertainment content reduced to ash. Among the destroyed materials were original I Dream of Jeannie episode masters, outtakes, and production footage. Preservation reports compiled in subsequent months detailed the specific losses. The fire had consumed original camera negatives, production masters, and edited outtakes that had never been broadcast. For I Dream of Jeannie specifically, the lost materials included alternate takes, deleted scenes, extended versions, and production footage showing how special effects were achieved. Yet this wasn't merely duplicative material, these were unique records that couldn't be reconstructed. Here's what made the loss particularly significant. Television production in the 1960s generated enormous amounts of film footage that was routinely discarded or inadequately stored after broadcast. The industry viewed programming as disposable content, valuable while generating advertising revenue, but worthless once broadcast concluded. Studios invested minimal resources in archival preservation. The I Dream of Jeannie materials destroyed in 1978 had survived 13 years after the series ended, not because anyone valued them, but because nobody had specifically ordered their destruction. The fire eliminated that backlog in the most destructive way possible. Decades later, when television archives became recognized as culturally valuable, the magnitude of the 1978 loss became clear. Historians seeking to understand 1960s television production methods discovered that crucial primary source materials had been destroyed. The outtakes and production footage that would have provided detailed documentation of how I Dream of Jeannie was made no longer existed. But only fragments survived through fan dedication. Some viewers had recorded episodes using early home video equipment. These fan recordings, of inconsistent quality, became the only surviving versions of some material. Yet substantial gaps remained where footage had existed only in the Columbia storage facilities. Television archives document not just entertainment content, but entire production methodologies and creative processes. When those archives are destroyed, we lose the ability to understand how entertainment was actually created. We can watch broadcast versions, yet we can't study the creative process. But here's what matters: this loss wasn't unique to I Dream of Jeannie. The 1978 Columbia fire destroyed materials from hundreds of productions. Yet for Eden's career specifically, it eliminated primary source documentation of her most famous role. Modern archival standards reflect painful lessons learned from disasters like the 1978 fire. Studios now maintain multiple copies in geographically separated locations. Yet these improved standards came too late for materials created in the 1960s and destroyed in the 1970s. Number 4. She co-wrote her autobiography after refusing ghostwriting control. In 1988, major publishers approached Barbara Eden with offers to produce her autobiography. The standard arrangement was ghostwritten narrative. But this model dominated celebrity memoir production. Publishers expected Eden would accept similar terms. Yet Eden declined. Her objections centered on factual accuracy and narrative control. She had witnessed other celebrity autobiographies where ghostwriters prioritized dramatic storytelling over precise documentation, occasionally distorting events. Eden wanted to ensure that her autobiography maintained strict accuracy. But here's what that decision meant: Eden was refusing substantial, immediate financial compensation. Yet accepting those terms meant surrendering control over how her career and life were presented. Eden chose to wait. But this wasn't naivete. Eden understood publishing economics and the transient nature of celebrity interest. She was making a calculated decision that prioritizing accuracy over immediacy might cost her financially, but would produce a more historically reliable document. 23 years passed before Eden's autobiography appeared. Genie Out of the Bottle was published in 2011, co-written with Wendy Lay and drawing directly from Eden's personal diaries, production notes, and archived correspondence. The book provided specific dates, verifiable details, and careful documentation, exactly what Eden had insisted on protecting. The 2-decade delay had allowed her to organize primary source materials and develop the manuscript on terms she controlled. Yet the publishing industry had changed dramatically between 1988 and 2011. But increased scrutiny about factual accuracy meant publishers valued documented reliability more. Several high-profile cases of fabricated memoir content had damaged publisher reputations. Editorial standards had tightened. Eden's insistence on archival accuracy, which seemed commercially problematic in 1988, aligned perfectly with 2011 publishing priorities. She maintained control over her own narrative at substantial financial cost, waited until she could produce the book meeting her standards, and eventually published under conditions that validated her initial concerns. The 2011 autobiography received praise specifically for its detailed documentation and careful attention to chronological accuracy. But here's what separates this from typical celebrity memoir stories: Eden's refusal wasn't about ego. She wasn't insisting on writing every word herself or rejecting professional editorial assistance. She was specifically protecting factual accuracy, insisting that her autobiography function as legitimate historical documentation. Publishing industry professionals noted that Eden's approach was highly unusual for celebrity autobiography. Most performers viewed memoirs primarily as branding opportunities and income sources. Eden's insistence on archival standards represented outlier behavior that publishers found commercially challenging but ultimately respected. Number 3. She outlived the studio system that created her. By the 1980s, Barbara Eden had become a notable entertainment industry survivor. The studio system that had discovered her changed her name, and launched her career had collapsed completely. But the contract player model had been abandoned entirely. The networks that controlled 1960s television had restructured multiple times. Yet Eden continued working regularly, adapting to each new industry configuration. Trade journals highlighted her consistency as noteworthy. Performers who built careers in the 1950s and peaked in the 1960s typically saw their opportunities diminish substantially by the 1980s. The industry's preference for younger talent, combined with rapidly changing audience demographics, made sustained relevance difficult. Yet Eden maintained active presence across multiple formats: television, movies, guest appearances, stage work. But here's what separated Eden's career trajectory. She successfully transitioned across fundamental changes in how entertainment was produced and distributed. The studio system she entered in the 1950s operated under completely different economics than the independent production model, dominating by the 1980s. Under the studio system, performers were employees following instructions. In the independent era, performers operated as small businesses negotiating individual project deals. The transition required entirely different professional skills. Eden developed those skills gradually but effectively. As the studio system weakened, she began negotiating more favorable contract terms and gaining greater control. When I Dream of Jeannie ended in 1970, she avoided becoming permanently associated exclusively with that role by actively seeking diverse work. She accepted stage roles that demonstrated range beyond television comedy. She appeared in dramatic television movies that showcased different performance capabilities. Each project was chosen strategically to maintain career momentum while expanding her professional profile. Yet the entertainment economics that made this possible were brutal. By the 1980s, only performers who generated revenue consistently remained employable. The studio system's guaranteed salaries had vanished. Every role was negotiated individually. Eden maintained employment because she continued drawing audiences. Producers continued hiring her. Eden had to understand changing industry economics, recognize emerging formats, maintain relevant skills, and preserve sufficient public recognition to remain commercially valuable. The entertainment industry wasn't interested in loyalty or historical achievement. It responded only to current commercial value. Performers who couldn't adapt found themselves unemployed regardless of past success. Trade publications periodically featured articles examining why certain performers sustained long careers while most faded. Eden appeared in several such analyses, with industry observers noting her consistent professionalism and adaptability. Yet these weren't celebrations of artistic achievement. They were analytical case studies examining business factors that separated sustained employment from career decline. But here's what matters: Eden's survival wasn't accidental or simply the result of talent. It reflected systematic adaptation to changing industry conditions over multiple decades. She understood that entertainment was a business where past achievement provided no protection against current irrelevance. She continuously worked to maintain commercial value. That business discipline proved more important to career longevity than her most famous role or any critical recognition. By surviving the studio system's collapse and continuing to work through subsequent transformations, Eden became a case study in career adaptation. Entertainment business courses and industry analyses examined her career as an example of successful long-term strategy. Number 2, a costume on permanent display at the Smithsonian. In 2006, Barbara Eden's original I Dream of Jeannie costume entered the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. But the acquisition followed institutional deliberation about whether television wardrobe merited inclusion in the nation's official historical collections. Curators ultimately determined the costume qualified because it represented significant cultural themes: televised femininity during the Cold War era, fantasy escapism in 1960s popular culture, and the evolving presentation of women in mass media. The Smithsonian's acquisition process involved detailed authentication. Museum conservators examined the costume to verify its provenance as an actual production used piece. They reviewed Screen Gems production records, examined construction techniques consistent with 1960s television wardrobe practices, and consulted with Eden. Only after establishing conclusive authenticity did the museum proceed with formal acquisition. Yet here's what museum placement meant: the costume was now preserved under professional conservation standards designed to protect historical artifacts indefinitely. The Smithsonian maintains climate-controlled storage, uses specialized display cases that filter harmful light, and employs conservators who monitor artifacts for deterioration. Eden's costume would receive the same careful stewardship given to artifacts from American political history, technological development, and cultural movements. The curatorial interpretation provided context for why this particular television costume warranted museum preservation. Official museum documentation described the artifact as representing televised femininity and Cold War escapism. The show premiered during escalating Vietnam involvement and Cold War tensions, offering audiences escapist fantasy. The costume itself, revealing yet carefully censored, exotic yet domesticated, embodied contradictions in how 1960s television presented female sexuality to mass audiences. Museum exhibition created permanent public access to a television artifact most viewers had only seen on screen. The physical object revealed construction details invisible in broadcast, the actual fabrics used, the methods for achieving certain visual effects, the practical modifications made for performer comfort. Visitors could examine the costume closely. A whiskey bottle converted into a prop and a television costume designed for a 1965 pilot, both preserved as official artifacts of American history. The trajectory from commercial production to museum collection reflects how entertainment materials are eventually recognized as legitimate historical documentation. Television, initially dismissed as disposable popular culture, gradually gained recognition as significant cultural force worthy of archival preservation. But here's what separates this from typical celebrity memorabilia. The costume wasn't acquired because Eden was famous or because fans valued it sentimentally. The Smithsonian's decision was based on historical significance, the artifact's ability to document and illustrate specific aspects of American cultural history. Museum curators weren't collecting celebrity costumes generally, they were acquiring specific artifacts that served institutional missions. The museum display includes contextual interpretation explaining the costume's significance. Visitors learn about 1960s television censorship, the treatment of female performers in popular media, and how entertainment reflects broader social anxieties. The costume becomes an educational tool for understanding its historical moment. From production workshop to museum collection represents an unusual journey. The costume was created as disposable television wardrobe, expected to last through 5 seasons and then be discarded. Yet it became a preserved artifact outlasting the studio that produced it, the network that broadcast the show, and the original broadcast technology that delivered it to audiences. Number 1. The scene the network wouldn't air. During I Dream of Jeannie's 5th and final season, production teams filmed a wedding episode bringing marriage to Tony and Jeannie. But the episode was completed, edited, and delivered to NBC according to normal production schedules. Yet network executives made an unprecedented decision. They refused to air the episode for nearly a year. The reasoning, documented in internal network correspondence, centered on executives' fear that marriage would end the fantasy. But this wasn't creative disagreement or quality concerns. The network's objection was purely conceptual. Executives believed the series' appeal depended on maintaining tension between Tony's attempts to hide Jeannie and her magical disruptions. Marriage would resolve that tension permanently. Network management determined that broadcasting the wedding episode would effectively terminate the series' conceptual foundation. Yet here's what made the situation strange. NBC had already renewed the series for a 5th season, implicitly accepting that narrative evolution was necessary after 4 years. The wedding episode wasn't a surprise. It was developed through normal production processes with network oversight and approval. Only after the episode was completed did network executives confront the implications of their own approved creative direction. The completed episode sat on network shelves for months while executives debated whether to air it. Meanwhile, the production team continued filming subsequent 5th season episodes. This created cascading complications. Should those later episodes reference the marriage or pretend it hadn't happened? The uncertainty paralyzed normal production planning. But public demand ultimately forced the network's hand. I Dream of Jeannie maintained substantial audience loyalty. Word had leaked that a wedding episode existed but wasn't being broadcast. Fan mail increased. Television columnists picked up the story. NBC faced the uncomfortable position of explaining why they were withholding content audiences specifically wanted to see. The episode finally aired in December 1970, near the end of the 5th season. Yet the delay meant it appeared in what would become the series' final months. By the time viewers finally saw Tony and Jeannie's wedding, NBC had already decided not to renew for a sixth season. The episode the network had feared would kill the series aired just as the series was ending anyway. NBC executives believed viewers invested in Jeannie specifically because of unresolved romantic tension. They feared that resolving those tensions would eliminate viewers' reason for watching. This reflected a particular theory about audience psychology that viewers needed narrative incompleteness to sustain interest. But here's what matters: the network was probably wrong. Television series had successfully evolved beyond initial premises before. The Andy Griffith Show, Bewitched, and other contemporaries had navigated major character changes without losing audiences. NBC's fear about Jeannie's wedding likely overestimated how much audiences needed status quo preservation. Yet the decision to withhold the episode reveals something more significant. It demonstrates the power television networks held over creative content and narrative development. The episode was filmed, paid for, and delivered. Yet executives could simply refuse to air it based on strategic concerns having nothing to do with content quality. Production teams had no recourse. The business side controlled creative output absolutely. Years later, television historians examining I Dream of Jeannie identified the wedding episode controversy as emblematic of network television's tensions between creative development and commercial caution. The ultimate irony: executives feared marriage would end the fantasy. They delayed the wedding episode until the series was already ending. The caution they exercised to protect the show's viability coincided exactly with the show's cancellation. The episode the network feared would end I Dream of Jeannie aired just as I Dream of Jeannie was ending anyway. A perfect symbol of how television's relationship between fantasy and reality, between commercial calculation and creative risk, defined entertainment in the 1960s and shaped every moment of Barbara Eden's most famous role. The studio system that controlled her name, her face, and her personal life collapsed decades ago. But the real artifact is Barbara Eden herself, a woman who survived surveillance, censorship, and control to become one of the few stars who outlasted the system that created her. If you like this video, you may also like other videos in our channel about beautiful ladies of yesteryear.